Trump lifted sanctions on several Russian companies and banks, including Rosoboronexport, Russia's state arms trader and sole authorized exporter of military and dual-use goods. Kiev Post. Donald Trump is tilting toward Russia. He is withdrawing military support from Ukraine. He has removed key Russian banks and companies from the sanctions list. Russia demands that Ukraine disarm and give over territory. Russia will not modify these demands. Today we see that nearly all military support for Ukraine is being withdrawn by President Trump. Ukraine has, in effect, protected Europe from Russian invasion for over 3 years. Ukrainians have shown that they will fight for their freedom and for Europe's freedom. By his actions, President Trump seems to prefer a Russian victory. He does not care about Ukraine or Europe. He thinks that America can live happily while dozens of nations are trampled under the Russian boot. Trump has often expressed admiration for Russian strength and contempt for Europe's weakness. Europe's military establishments are weak because 1. Europe was tricked into disarmament by the supposed collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. 2. Europe has also believed that America will defend her. Now that America's willingness to defend Europe has been called into question, the Ukrainians are Europe's main line of defense. Can the Ukrainians hold the line against Russia with only European support? Trump's brain trust will say that Europe does not matter. Only Russia's friendship counts. We must divide Russia from China, they say. This policy is suicide, as are many of the policies of Western governments today. China and Russia cannot be divided so easily. In fact, China is helping Russia to win the war in Ukraine. Why? Because China is managed by communists who want to destroy the West and its economic dominance. It is in the nature of the Chinese and Russians to make war on the West. It is in their nature to feel envious and resentful toward the West. On June 21, 2025, the USA Today headline was, "Putin says the whole of Ukraine is ours." This affirms what many of us have said from the beginning of the war. The invasion of Ukraine is not about Ukrainian ethnic cleansing in Donbass. The invasion is about the eradication of Ukraine and its absorption into a new Soviet empire. Even a behindhand journal, like National Review, featured an article on April 17, 2023, by J. Nordlinger titled, "A Nation Extensively Re-Sovietized." Over the last 20 years, says Nordlinger, Russia has been re-Sovietized. The supposed democratic changes in Russia were initiated with re-Sovietization in mind. This is evident if we examine the evidence of the last 35 years. As early as 1994, Russian journalist and political scientist Yevgenia Albats wrote an investigative account of perestroika, showing that the same group, which traced its lineage to Stalin's police state, actually engineered the policy of perestroika, subtly and effectively controlling the overhaul of Soviet society in order to reposition itself at the top. Albats's account was published in English under the title, "The State Within a State, the KGB and its Hold on Russia, Past, Present, and Future." Add to this the work of KGB defector Anatoly Golitsyn, who predicted the advent of a false liberalization under a new Soviet leader who would come after Brezhnev. Golitsyn's book was published in 1984 under the title New Lies for Old. President Donald Trump will never read these books, and he will never accept the testimony of dissident Soviet authors, however prophetic or useful they have turned out to be. Consequently, Trump has misread the strategic situation. He prefers friendship with Vladimir Putin to friendship with Ukraine and Europe. While the left in America is determined to commit national suicide through identity politics and open borders, Trump is determined to commit suicide by abandoning friends and befriending enemies. It is an academic question as to which form of suicide is worse. In terms of Putin's plan for victory in Europe, it is useful to look at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. The reason Ukraine survived the first weeks of the Russian onslaught tell us a great deal about Putin's present strategy. Russia and China cannot win the coming wars of mass destruction by military means alone. Ultimately, they must win by taking control of key positions within the enemy camp. Leadership positions are the most important, along with positions in the security services of the target countries. A key insight about this comes from Yevgenia Albats, who gave the following remarks during an interview with Trudy Rubin of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Rubin, what were Putin's motives in starting this war? Albats, obviously, I cannot get into Putin's head. Therefore, it is very difficult to talk about motives. However, we can talk about incentives. I think it is obvious, at least it is obvious to me, that Putin decided to conduct a quick war. However, he miscalculated badly. The initial idea was, as far as I can read it, to quickly conquer Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, to kill Zelensky or make him go into exile, and then use agents. As the Ukrainian Secret Service was part of the KGB, the Soviet, Russian FSB has had a hell of a lot of agents inside this Ukrainian security service. So, after Zelensky is gone and the government is dead, these agents were going to take over. In Ukraine, all across the country, just like happened in Kherson, where the FSB agent, the head of the local SBU, Security Service of Ukraine, told the people to lay down their arms and not to resist against the Russian army. And that's how the Russian occupied Kherson so quickly. Putin never of course expected that Zelensky was going to stay. He never took Zelensky seriously. He was this Jew clown and actor. How could this Jew/clown/actor compare himself to Putin? This great Putin, who befriended 2/3 of the world and who was met by European cabinets. The Russian armed forces are not the key to victory. They are poorly led and poorly trained. Victory depends on having agents inside the enemy camp to enable rapid occupation of target country. The most important agent of all would be the top leader of the target country. If a country's leader is not an agent, he should be a clown who runs away. However, if the leader is not a clown, or if he is loyal to his country, the Russian army has to fight. And fighting is not something the Russian army does well. In the case of Ukraine, we find a famous Jewish comedian in the role of president. Zelensky became president of Ukraine after playing the president of Ukraine in a TV comedy about government corruption. The election of a comedian to the presidency was a strange joke, but the joke was on the Kremlin, for the comedian was a serious man. Leadership in war is always an important factor. Since the Russians have a badly led army, the elimination of the Ukrainian leadership through treason or cowardice was their only path to victory. Zelensky's surprise performance as president of Ukraine has proved to be better than his comic television portrayal. The strategists in Moscow believe that the elimination of Zelensky would have brought victory in 2022. Today they believe something similar. The Ukrainian leader must be reduced in stature. He must be brought down. This strategic goal helps us to better understand why Zelensky was treated so badly during the miserable February 28, 2025 Oval Office meeting, where an attempt was made to reduce him to non-entity status. If Zelensky had not stood up for himself and his country during the verbal assault of the vice president, the Ukrainians would have been demoralized. The role of a leader in wartime is moralization. Both President Trump and Vice President Vance rebuked Zelensky for his handling of the war and blamed him for holding out against Russian aggression. If Zelensky had humbly looked down at the floor as many critics wanted, acting the part of a respectful minion, his nation would have lost faith in him. His usefulness as a leader would have come to an end. It would have been better than assassinating him. That Zelensky's treatment in the White House was calculated is certain. That the plan backfired is also certain. Almost nobody caught the calculated goal of this meeting from the Russian strategic point of view. The Russians always aim at killing or discrediting a nation's leaders. If you cannot kill a leader or make him run like a coward, you can cut him down to size. You can demean him. That is, you can reduce him to the status of a nonentity. This would not only have damaged Ukrainian morale, but added to Russian morale by affirming one of Russia's key propaganda messages, namely, that Ukraine has no agency because it is a puppet of American imperialism. Both U.S. leaders during the disgraceful Oval Office meeting with Zelensky were channeling Putin's fury. The Jew clown should have run off to America in President Biden's proffered aircraft on day 2 of the war. Zelensky had no cards to play, as Trump said, but Zelensky replied that he was not playing cards. In 2022, in fact, Zelensky made a clown out of Putin by staying in Kiev and risking what then seemed to be certain death. Putin's strategy of rapid conquest failed. Russia would have to fight a long war. China would have to delay its planned mobilization in the Far East. Rubin, has this led Putin to change his strategy? Albits. Yes. Putin has said that the war is going to be long and hard and tough. And now, yes, he changed his strategy. Absolutely. Now it is not clear what his strategy is because he keeps shuffling his generals. Obviously, no one is good because no one is capable of killing enough Ukrainians to occupy Ukraine. Putin cannot find an easy military solution. He cannot find a good general. The reason, of course, is that he would not accept the advice of a good general if one could be found. Boris Yeltsin said that Putin was the good general. No need, then, to listen to anyone else. Putin has two ways out. 1. Nuclear world war. Or 2. Call retreat and make peace. Nuclear world war is theoretically winnable in Russian terms. Retreat might destabilize his regime. Better to die in a war than suffer the humiliation of being tossed out of power, which would also result in death. Is Putin planning a wider war? Yes. According to a story by Camilla Jessen from a week ago, Kiev's intelligence services have collected evidence of Russia preparing for further military operations across Europe. Zelensky made this claim after being briefed by Kirilo Budanov, the head of Ukrainian military intelligence, on June 22, 2025. According to Zelensky, we have evidence that they are preparing new military operations on European territory. We will share everything we know. Rather than working through NATO, Zelensky is coordinating his defense with the European Union and United Kingdom. This suggests NATO is considered untrustworthy because the Americans are in NATO and President Trump prefers to see a Russian victory in Ukraine. Therefore, sharing intelligence with the Americans is not an option. Zelensky has also spoken about increased North Korean participation in the war and Russia's use of Chinese soldiers in the fighting. Russia is receiving support from its communist allies. This should alarm the United States, but President Trump has not commented on China's role in helping Moscow. Trump's brain trust is also quiet on this topic. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov continues to refer to Europe as rabid and militaristic. This is ludicrous, since Europe is poorly armed and unready for war. Kremlin spokesman mischaracterizes Europe. The truth is the opposite of what the Kremlin says. Recently, Putin made the following remarks at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. I've said it before, Russians and Ukrainians are one people. In this sense, all of Ukraine is ours. There's an old rule that wherever a Russian soldier sets food, that's ours. In 1814, Russian soldiers set foot in Paris and they took Berlin in 1945. Many other European capitals have been occupied by Russian troops in history. Wherever a Russian soldier sets foot, alas, poor Europe. Warsaw, Budapest, Bucharest, Helsinki, Sofia, Prague, etc., have all been occupied by Russian troops during past wars. According to Putin, all these countries belong to Russia. What does the philosopher behind Trump's dark enlightenment say about all this? Shortly before the invasion of Ukraine, Curtis Yarvin referred in his blog to my hyperbolic contempt for the invented country of Ukraine. Yarvin said it was fun to play the part of Joseph Goebbels. He felt regret. Hopefully the Azov battalion will not assault my home, he added. In an interview 3 years ago, Yarvin told an interviewer, the idea that there is an American dog in this fight is just utterly preposterous. What is the objective of this pro-Russian, pro-communist propaganda? You may object, of course, that I call Yarvin pro-communist. But I say he writes under camouflage. He says America is the communist power of the world. I say it is Russia and China, with America heavily infiltrated. To understand who is right, we must translate everything into the language of strategy. Who advocates a break in the West's collective security? Who advocates the Russian propaganda line? Who would break up the Western alliance? Who facilitates the enemy's game of divide and conquer? Yarvin's rhetoric, along with Trump's rhetoric, has followed this line of approach. Here we glimpse the Russian and Chinese plan in a nutshell. And when this plan starts to work, the Democrats in America, who are led by ideological communists, will come to power and accuse the Republicans of betraying the West. And they will be right in doing so. And they will conduct the surrender negotiations with Chinese guidance.